What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another edition of Pistons Daily, where you can find daily content covering all things Detroit Pistons every single day. My name's Kyle Garrison. I'm your host. You can find me over on Twitter at Kyle Garrison2, where I talk all things Detroit sports. So come on over, say hello, give me comments, questions, concerns, episode ideas. I'd love to hear from you guys. Also, thank you to everyone who tunes in every single day. The support on the channel has been unbelievable so far. And with that being said, let's jump right into today's video. So the first thing I want to talk about is the sign and trade with Sacramento for Dennis Schroeder, and I'll just give my thoughts on that as that has started to become more of a reality the past 24 hours or so. And then I'll just dive into three players I think could be involved in the sign and trade and headed to Detroit in Malik Monk, John Collins, and Keegan Murray. But first things first, let's just talk about the details of the sign and trade. So this was all reported by Amari Sankofa II over at the Detroit Free Press. He does an unbelievable job of covering the Pistons, so go check out his stuff. But basically, as many of you know, the Dennis Schroeder to the Kings sign and trade talks kind of died down because the Kings were unwilling to give up Malik Monk straight up for Dennis Schroeder. And so those talks died down. But over the last 24 hours, another team has jumped into conversations, and that is the Golden State Warriors. So we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But I just wanted to talk about what the sign and trade means essentially. So basically, the Pistons have two options. One, they can take back up to $22.6 million in salary in a sign and trade for Dennis Schroeder. Or number two, the Pistons can choose not to take back any salary and generate a $14.3 million trade exception, where they can then trade for a player or multiple players up to $14.3 million without affecting the overall cap space. So basically, they can carry on this trade exception if they choose to go that route over into next season to make a midseason move, or they can take on $22.6 million max in salary in a sign and trade. It doesn't have to be the full 22.6, but we'll just go over some scenarios where if the Pistons were to take on that $22.6 million instead of going the route of taking the trade exception, who are some guys that could fit that mold? Who are some guys that could be potential options the Pistons go after in a three-team trade, two-team trade, just depending on how the salaries work out. And the first player I want to talk about is Malik Monk. He's kind of the name that came up first when they were talking about the sign and trade initially, and a lot of Pistons are pretty mixed on it, but I'll just give my thoughts on it. I'll give my thoughts on what the actual trade would be and then what it would entail if the Pistons were to add Malik Monk. So the proposed deal, like I said, a three-team trade between Golden State, Sacramento, and Detroit. Detroit would get Malik Monk. Golden State would get Devin Carter and Dario Saric from the Kings. And then Sacramento would get Dennis Schroeder, who obviously they got from the Pistons in the sign-and trade. And then Jonathan Kuminga, who's coming from Golden State. So obviously that sweetens the pot a little bit more for the Kings. They're more willing to do this deal now. They're more willing to part ways with Malik Monk if they were to get Schroeder and Kuminga. But I think right now, I'm just speculating, I think Golden State's probably the one holding this up because their return is clearly not as much as the Kings and the Pistons would be getting. But if Golden State decides not to budge, the Pistons could either pivot or try to bring in another team in the three-team deal, because it seems like the Kings are not satisfied with Schroeder for Monk straight up, which I understand. I think Monk is obviously a younger player and has more upside right now, but like I said, Malik Monk fits the $22.6 million salary that the Pistons could take on. He's only making $18.8 million next year, which is not that much less than Dennis Schroeder, who I believe is at 3 years, 45. So that could be an option for the Pistons. And if they do add Malik Monk, there is some questions it poses. Again, the backcourt rotation becomes kind of clouded at that point. You did just add Caris LeVert. Duncan Robinson is another guy who does play that 2 or 3 guard and can play that wing position. So you're a little bit more crowded, but then again, you can never have enough depth in this league. And recently, Malik Monk has really shown the ability to facilitate, to play the point guard. He averaged a career high 5.6 assists per game last year as the primary ball handler for the Kings. And he did a great job. I thought he was very efficient. There was a lot of times where you could see he was a little bit uncomfortable playing the point guard, but as the year went on, he got he gelled into the system more. And I think he could play a good backup point guard for the Pistons if need be. In that case, you'd have a rotation of Cade and Jaden Ivey as your 1 and 2 guards, and then Caris LeVert and Malik Monk coming off of the bench, with Duncan Robinson probably playing the 3 and Ron Holland playing the 4. So a little bit, obviously, of a smaller lineup, but Caris LeVert's 6'6", Malik Monk's around 6'5". He's long, he's athletic. Duncan's 6'7", Ron Holland's 6'7". So you really have a 1 through 4 of guys that are all the same height off of the bench. which, again, height doesn't really mean all that much in the league, especially if you're playing stellar defense and if you have a guy like Isaiah Stewart on the floor who's a little bit undersized as well, but plays a lot bigger. So it just makes things a little bit interesting. And again, it just seems like a trade where you pull the trigger for talent and you figure out the schematic fit later on. And it sounds like Malik Monk's probably the most likely option. I'm just speculating right now. I have no idea what's going on in the front office and what the negotiations are looking like. But if I would have had to guess, Malik Monk, if the Pistons were to go through with this sign and trade and take on the $22.6 million, then Malik Monk would probably be that guy. But let me know in the comments or over on Twitter if you'd like to see Malik Monk on the team next year and what specific role you think he would play if he does join the team. But moving on, another guy I wanted to talk about, and it's a name that's been kind of thrown around the Pistons community, not just recently, but over the past few months, is John Collins. I know I talked about him a couple of weeks ago on the channel. So with John Collins, things get a little bit more interesting adding Utah as the third team in the sign and trade. And that's just because Collins is making $26.58 million this year. So the Pistons would most likely have to give up more assets to make it work. Obviously, they would have to clear up $4 million in cap space in order to take on the 26.58 without affecting their cap space. But the most likely route, unfortunately, would probably be dealing Marcus Sasser and Bobby Klintman to make contracts work and stay under that 22.6. I imagine Utah would also probably want a first-round pick or two for John Collins. And again, I don't know if Trajan Langdon is willing to part ways with more draft capital, considering he didn't have his first-round draft pick this year. And I think that probably he would rather ride with Tobias and Ron Holland and then take that trade exception, that $14 million trade exception, and do something at the deadline that's a little cheaper. Again, John Collins is an unrestricted free agent going into next offseason, so you're really only taking 1 year of his deal, but then again, you have to give up Sasser, Klintman, and probably a first-round pick. So again, it's a really tough scenario. If you really value John Collins, maybe you think it's worth it, but when you're looking at it schematically, adding Malik Monk for less would probably make more sense. But again, John Collins, you have to have the conversation. You have to bring up Tobias Harris when you're talking about him. And Tobias isn't going anywhere. We know that. He'll be the starter. But again, like I mentioned with Monk, it can't hurt to have positional depth, especially when Tobias and John Collins, they play pretty different styles of basketball. So having them on the floor at different times could just give a different look to the defense, which I wouldn't hate at all. I like Tobias' ability to take people off the dribble, shoot the mid-range. It would allow him to step in from the three-point line and kind of focus more on his mid-range game, getting to the cup, playing defense. And then John Collins can be your more floor-spacing wing if you want to. So again, I think it just adds depth, and I don't hate the idea of adding floor spacing whatsoever. I think it would allow for JD and Tobias to just hone in on the things that they're the best at, and you can have a guy like John Collins come in who can play with Isaiah Stewart. He can play with Jalen Duren as well. Sometimes he could probably play with Tobias, play the five. You'll probably try and not do that just because Tobias and John Collins aren't the greatest rebounders, but something along those lines would work. And again, JB Bickerstaff would find a spot for John Collins in the rotation if need be. But I think one thing to just keep in mind is even if the Pistons don't take on the $26 million salary and choose to take the $14.3 million trade exception, like I said, they're probably going to make a move at the deadline regardless. So it's just a matter if you do it now or later or what that looks like. And overall, again, I've seen mixed reactions to John Collins. Some people like him. Some people just don't like his lack of defense and don't think he would really bring much upside to this team. But let me know in the comments if you think he can fit into this room or to this front court rotation, or if you'd rather see Tobias continue kind of to take the reins at power forward and kind of take that role himself. But before we wrap things up, one more player that I did want to talk about is Keegan Murray. I think that he's probably the least likely out of the two players I mentioned. Again, it's speculation. Who knows? Keegan Murray could become a Piston, and I would be completely dead wrong. But I don't love the fit with Keegan Murray, and I also think that Trajan Langdon and JB Bickerstaff would be able to realize this as well, especially considering Trajan Langdon has talked about how he needs to extend Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey. Keegan Murray was in the same draft class as them. He was a lottery pick. He's making $11 million this year before his deal is up, and then he's also going to be owed an extension. So right there, you'd have 3 lottery picks from that draft class. I think it was 2022, and you kind of are in a weird spot because you then have to put all your eggs in these 3 players, And Keegan Murray, at the end of the day, he's an okay player, but he's not going to be worth the contract that he's going to get just because he is owed an extension. If it's in Sacramento, if it's somewhere else, he'll definitely get a decent amount of money. I don't know if it'll be more than the John Collins at 26.5. I actually guarantee you it's not, but it could be still around $20 million a year, something similar to kind of what Jabari Smith got, maybe reaching towards $25 million. Having a stretch four, they're very valuable. So even if they're not producing, they still can make a decent amount of money. But one of the things I just don't like is he just doesn't bring significant improvement on the defensive end. And compared to Tobias and John Collins, he's not a great offensive player. I think Tobias and John Collins are better at what they know what to do and what they're asked to do. Keegan Murray, he was supposed to be a spot-up shooter, a lights-out shooter, and he did well in his rookie year, but last year he was around 34% from three, which was the same as Tobias Harris, and he does not give you nearly as much isolation scoring as Tobias Harris does. So again, I don't know if Keegan Murray is really the right option there. He shot 44, 34, 81 splits last year, which was worse than John Collins and Tobias Harris. And again, like I said, you're going to have to extend him. He's owed another contract. He's done with his rookie deal after this year. So I think there's just a lot of areas he has deficiencies, and they're similar to John Collins, but Collins offers way more offensive upside, especially as a shooter, as a floor spacer, as a ball handler, somebody that can get downhill. He's athletic, way more athletic than Keegan Murray, can finish above the rim better than Keegan Murray. So if you're going to try and actually use that $22.6 million in salary, I think John Collins is a better option. Again, he's also an unrestricted free agent next year, so you're not tied down to him. With Keegan Murray, I feel like you'd probably force your hand and you'd probably want to extend him, which would then create a ton of havoc with the Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren extensions. Asar Thompson's going to be owed an extension here coming up in a couple summers. So there's just a lot to take in with this, and I think adding more of a veteran guy who's already had multiple contracts in the NBA, like Malik Monk or John Collins, just makes more sense overall than Keegan Murray. But if you're going to go get a guy like Keegan Murray, you might as well get John Collins, and he just offers you more offensive upside. Again, a little bit older and not a great defender, but either is Keegan Murray. So again, let me know your thoughts in the comments on who of the three players mentioned you wouldn't mind the Pistons going after with the $22.6 million sign-in trade. If it's Keegan Murray, if it's John Collins, Malik Monk, out of those three, who you think. And also just continue to let me know other options that you'd like to see. I've heard PJ Washington's name as Dallas being another player in this three-team trade. So we'll see what kind of happens, but that's really all I've got for you guys today. Let me know in the comments or over on Twitter your thoughts on the Pistons potentially being involved in a sign and trade for Dennis Schroeder, and if you'd like to see the front office add a player for that $22.6 million or take the $14.3 million trade exception instead. As always, like, subscribe, comment, turn on post notifications, and follow me on Twitter over at Kyle Garrison 2. Once again, thank you guys all so much for 1,000 subscribers. The channel is growing at an unbelievable rate, and it's all thanks to you guys. With that being said, that is going to do it here for episode 16 of Pistons Daily, and I will catch you all next time.